Morning, members, and welcome. Oh, believe it. My big. I shall vacate the chair. Were you waiting deliberately, Nigel, outside there? Just. For a second time, good morning, everyone, and my profound apologies for a late start. I had actually discussed with Matt the probability of a late start because it would have been, I think, helpful to have had the training recap ahead of the meeting rather than during the meeting. That was the principal reason why I had anticipated a delayed start. But as I said, other events have intervened, and so we are where we are, so to speak. But anyway, right. I know we've got some new faces in amongst us, and it would be really helpful, I think, if we probably started off with some introductions. So from the public point of view, I think it might be helpful as well as for me. So my name is Nigel Dixon, and I'm the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at North Norfolk District Council. So I think it would be useful if we go round and introduce ourselves as members, and then I'll ask officers here to do the same. So starting off from the right, if we may, please.
So Gary Bull, North Walsham East, newly elected, obviously.
Thank you.
Good morning, members. I'm Saul Penfold, councillor for the mighty Worstead ward and vice chairman of Overview and Scrutiny. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Roy MacDonald. I'm the member for Roughton ward.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Jill Boyle and I'm the joint member for Cromer Town ward.
Thank you. That completes the front rank, so to speak. Moving to the rear rank.
Good morning, I'm John Toy, a member for Erpingham ward and also chairman for the GRAC committee. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Tim Adams, a member for Cromer Town ward. Jill, and here not as a member today, but as a observer and delivering reports on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Martin Beatty on the Holt ward.
Thank you.
Lucy Shires, North Walsham West. I'm here as an observer and the portfolio holder for finance, estates and property services.
Good morning. I'm Callum Ringer. I'm the member for Gresham ward, also here as an observer and the portfolio holder for IT, environmental and waste services.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Peter Fisher, member for Wells and Holcombe.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Liz Vickers, member for Fakenham, Lancaster South ward and member of this committee.
Thank you.
Good morning, Nigel Housden, the Raynhams ward.
Thank you.
Victoria Holiday Coastal.
Thank you.
Morning, Christopher Cushing, member for the equally mighty Fakenham Lancaster North ward.
Thank you. Right, okay, I think that complete. Sorry, over to my extreme right.
Good morning, Councillor Andy Fitztillett, member for Poppyland ward and leader of the independent group and observing.
Okay, so the officers then from my left.
Matt Stemberich, Democratic Services and Scrutiny Officer.
To my right.
Steve Blatch, Chief Executive.
Morning, everyone. Tina Stankley, Director of Resources and Section 151 Officer.
Good morning, I'm Steve Hems, Director for Communities.
And one other officer heading behind.
Thank you. I'm Lucy Wilshaw, the Corporate Data Analyst.
Thank you for that. Right, okay. I think that's just helpful that we kind of get off to at least knowing who one another are, so to speak. Right, so turning to the agenda, item 1, to receive apologies for absence.
We have no apologies from committee members. I do note that we are one committee member short. Unfortunately, John Toy can't sit on the committee as chairman of the Governance, Risk and Audit Committee, so we are awaiting a new appointment for that.
So, Councillor Adams, where are we in the process?
Well, I think that's just been described. We need to appoint someone else. Thank you.
Leave it with you. Substitutes?
None.
Thank you. Item 3, public questions and statements.
None received.
Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. We can just turn to the minutes of the last meeting then, please. And we'll go through them for accuracy in the first instance. So page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. The absence of any hands or voices, for those of you that were present, can I take it that they are an accurate record of the meeting minutes? Can I have a show of hands, please, for those that were here? And there are no dissenters? Thank you. Right, now I will sign the minutes as an accurate record in due course. Just before we move off the minutes, there is a matter of arising. If we just turn to page 2, paragraph 3, just over halfway down the page, describes an item that we were discussing, the North Walsham Heritage Action Zone, and there were some actions that were identified there, and I think it's probably fair to say that whilst some actions have been taken, they've not yet reached a conclusion whereby we could put the matter back on the agenda today for further discussion and possible closure. So what we outside of the meeting or ahead of the meeting, I've had discussions with the Vice Chairman and Councillor Housden and the Chief Executive with regard to what we need to do before the next meeting, and the intention is to bring the matter back to the meeting in July. Okay, are you content with that, Councillor Penfold?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to say, yeah, happy to have a further meeting, but could I just on record invite you to North Walsham for that meeting? I think that would be advantageous for us to meet there, to see the scheme, to discuss whilst we are in situ, if you like, and you know, to see I think it'd be much easier for us to understand any complexities if we do that in North Walsham itself. So happy to host you there. Be very pleased to.
Well, that I think is a discussion that we need to have after the meeting. We've got two, I think, possibilities. One is we have a meeting here, and the other we have a meeting on site. So I think that will be for us to be discussing after this meeting, so that we can agree the means by which we do that. Are we content to leave that matter at that point?
Mr. Chairman, sorry, just I don't want to prolong this, but I like Councillor Penfold's suggestion, but we still need figures put in front of us, and I think that is the key factor.
I think that's a point well made, and that's a point that I think we will need to discuss after the meeting with regard to which way we go on that. Okay. Mr. Blatch.
Well, I think for the public record, Chair, it would be useful to understand what is outstanding because Mrs. Stankley did provide a detailed breakdown following the meeting. I'm always happy to meet with members to discuss any concerns that they have, but I think there does need to be clarity in the public space as to what is outstanding and what you would like to have brought back to you at your meeting in July. Your Vice Chairman has said he would host a meeting so that this is a large rural district. I accept that 45 miles from end to end, not all members have a detailed understanding of the different places and spaces that we have. So I think the offer of a hosted meeting in North Walsham has a lot of merit to it. But I think in order that officers can prepare for that meeting, beyond the information that Mrs. Stankley has provided, it would be useful to understand what those outstanding issues are, please.
Yes, I think that's probably quite easily done. I think actually, if we were to go back through the minutes, we would see that those minutes do actually reflect that. But I think for the benefit of new members, it might be helpful if we recapped on that.
Fine. Yep. If you're happy with that, Mr. Chairman. Yep.
Indeed.
Okay. Do you want me to go? Fine. Okay.
Indeed. Yes.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. And obviously time's moving on quite quickly. I think it was in October, we had a request for £400,000 as an extra overspend. December. But I raised the question about the budget in October, and that wasn't satisfied. The figures weren't satisfied in October. I think it was then raised again in November, and we got to the specifics in December. But we have not had an accurate, significant, detailed breakdown of what the £400,000 were for. We've had seats, we've had planking, we've had all sorts of things, and we've had suggestions about forward purchasing materials. But at this moment in time, a specific detailed breakdown of £400,000, which had to come from the special reserve, has not definitively been provided. And I would like it. You know, it's something that Overview and Scrutiny is here to scrutinise. And I think we should see that process through. But like you, I don't want to prolong this meeting in order to get to that point.
Does that meet your need?
I believe that information was provided by the Section 151 officer at your meeting on the 15th of February. I accept that Councillor Housden wasn't present at that meeting, and that's recorded in the minutes, I believe, or certainly on the recording of the meeting held on the 15th of March. Mrs. Stankley did provide you, Chair, with a detailed response on the 15th of May of this year, where that breakdown of purchase of an additional piece of land at Black Swan Loke, design and management fees, material costs and contractor costs were detailed, as was the funding of the programme by the District County Council, the Getting Building Britain Building Fund and Historic England. So that information has been made available. And so I think it would be helpful to understand what is outstanding at this point in time.
Do you want to add to that?
I'm just trying to go back to that email of the 15th of May.
It was provided to the Chair, Councillor Housden.
Councillor Penfold.
Thank you. And without wishing to prolong it too much, I think I do have a concern about where this is going, in that we have the 400,000 uplift has come through this committee and it has been agreed. It has gone through the Governance Risk and Audit Committee and there was no issue there. And it's also gone through full council. So I think we need to set that in context as well, that it has come through two committees and full council and been signed off.
I think that's a matter of fact, and that's not in dispute.
But so the concerns that were raised around the journey of the additional funding request, the delivery of the project, which was taken forward in the period September through till mid-March, and there were some challenges in the community at the time. Those issues have been very detailed discussions at meetings here. There was then a request, I believe, in February's meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, that the project governance for the North Walsham Heritage Action Zone project was subject to review and referral to the Government Risk and Audit Committee. That report was prepared by the project framework officer and was presented to Governance and Risk and Audit Committee at its meeting in March. And
it's my recollection that the report was well received and there were no questions or outstanding issues to be further addressed at that meeting of the Governance Risk and Audit Committee. And whilst I received your email yesterday afternoon, Chair, and I'm in agreement with a meeting and the Royal Vice Chair's suggestion that perhaps that is held in North Walsham so that context and understanding can be appreciated on the ground, but I'm not sure at this moment in time officers are clear about what outstanding issues remain of relevance to this committee, given the breakdown that Mrs. Stankley provided to you on the 15th of May.
I think the difficulty we face, Mr. Blatch, is that in some ways we would need to go down into the detail of this, and I don't believe that we are adequately prepared to do that at this particular time. And that was the whole purpose of a meeting after this, to move that forward. And we would then be able, I think, be better able to define exactly, because I agree with you completely. If we don't know what we're actually looking for, we won't know how best to meet that. And so I think, there is a piece of work to be done. And if we don't do that, then there's I personally would not be comfortable in making that decision right now. And I think that's probably best left to a discussion after this meeting, when a report of that can certainly be made to the next meeting in full. Councillor Shires.
Thank you. Just for a point of clarity, as finance portfolio holder, I've got absolutely no understanding based on what everyone said here, what we're still waiting for. So I can't support the committee in bringing any detail because it's not clear, and you yourself have said you don't know what you're looking for. Is this something that we believe there's an issue and we're trying to find an issue, or is it that we're looking to scrutinise something further like outcomes? Nothing at this meeting currently is clear on what we're looking for.
Mr. Chairman, I can probably help a little bit on that. If I just go back to your email on the 15th of March, which says the subject minutes 146 paras 2 and 3 record the long-standing concerns over the lack of evidence to justify the 400,000 for the Hayes project and how it would be spent. In paragraph 3, in respect of estimates supporting the case of the 400,000, you said you would seek to provide information in the coming days. That was on the 15th of April, several weeks ago, and we are now well outside the expectation of in the coming days. What progress has been made and what's the information? Now, you kindly forwarded the One Fine Officer's reply to me, and that still did not specify your request, which was made on the 15th of March.
Yeah, I think what we're about here is that, and you've mentioned the email exchange, and I think that without the members of this committee seeing that exchange of emails, it would not be helpful to conclude this matter in the way that's being suggested at the moment. So I think transparency and the point that you've raised, Councillor Shires, would be covered by that as well. So I think from a cabinet member point of view, you would want to know what that is, and I think that that's the opportunity to bring you up to speed as to where this matter rests. But I think that exchange of emails is the missing piece in the jigsaw at the moment, because certainly for new members, they will not have any sight of this matter, and I think that it would not be fair to make a decision of that kind at this point in the meeting. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am still struggling a bit to understand how what we are reopening here in the context of it having already come to this committee and passed through this committee. The committee was in agreement with that uplift on the basis of what we had been supplied. And then the same at full council was ratified there. So I don't know how that's how that works in terms of reopening something that is already been voted on by full council. So I need a bit of help with that.
I think in response to your request yesterday, Chair, that I meet with you, the Vice Chair and Councillor Housden to address these concerns. I'm agreeable to doing that. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Councillor Penfold has suggested that to improve understanding that meeting takes place in North Horsham. I'm happy for that to take place with any member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Governance, Risk and Audit Committee, or indeed any member of the council. I think for there to be focus and purpose for any meeting, it would be useful if you or Councillor Housden or any other member were able to outline an agenda for that meeting and say what outstanding information you believe is required, because otherwise we will meet for a pre-meeting and there won't be a record or transparency of that request. And then we may or may not meet in North Horsham subsequently. If officers are to prepare and respond in a way which is clearer than that provided to date, both through the project sponsor, Assistant Director for Sustainable Growth, Mrs. Stankley, as your Section 151 officer and Director of Resources, and the Performance Management Officer who presented the report to Governance, Risk and Audit Committee, I think it would be helpful for us to know in advance what the outstanding issues of concern are.
And I think that would be served by the meeting that we can have immediately after this.
I think I would request those are put in writing so that we know and we can prepare and make best use of the time in having a meeting with you.
In writing?
Yes, please, in writing.
That would be fine. Yes, I think that's
fine.
Yeah, yeah. If that's an acceptable way forward, what does the rest of the committee how does the rest of you feel? Yeah.
I think the suggestion of inviting other members is a good one to that meeting, if it does take place in North Horsham as well.
I think the question of meeting and where it takes place is something that will follow from the outlining of what needs to be done next. Yep. Otherwise, I think we are prejudging the issue, and I think we need to have a set of open minds. Right. Okay. If we are comfortable with that, then that's the way that we will move forward on that, and we will leave that as a matter of arising that will be brought back. The intention is to bring it back to the July meeting, assuming that work can be done between now and that July meeting date. Right. I think there were no other items of arising from the minutes. So if we can conclude that. How's the holiday?
I don't know if this is the appropriate time to raise it, Chair, but I was just looking that we were waiting as responses from the PCC in his absence, and we haven't actually gone through them. I was just noting that Matthew had sent some responses round, and I didn't want to have them lost. I wondered if we should raise them at some stage, not necessarily now, but I'd like to make sure we don't lose sight of them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Matt, are you able to help us with where we are on that?
I don't have them in front of me at the moment. I'm, to be honest, not prepared to read through them as you know, just finding them from emails. It might be best to do that in the next meeting when I've had a bit more time to look back at them.
Perhaps in the meantime, they can be circulated to all members.
Sorry, I understood that I did circulate them to members. Is that correct?
But what about new members?
Yeah, I can do that as well, yeah.
Okay. Right. Item 5, then, items of urgent business. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Thank you. Item 6, declarations of interest. There's guidance at item 6 for new members in particular with regard to the raising and disclosing of interests in connection with today's business. If you've read those papers, then you will know what is expected of you. Does anybody have any interest to declare in respect of today's business? No? Okay, thank you. Petitions from members of the public?
None received.
Thank you. Item 8 is consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 9, responses of the council or the cabinet to the committee's reports or recommendations.
None to report.
Thank you. Item 10 is the overview and scrutiny training recap. Can I first of all ask for a show of hands, those of you that have attended the training session that was put on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So, okay, and that includes all the new members here today. I think that's probably the most important consideration. Councillor Fisher.
I did make sure that I looked at the video which Matt has sent round yesterday and worked my way through that. It's very helpful.
Fine. Okay. Right. That just gives me some idea. There are some points that I would like to cover, because I think the way in which we work as a committee, it's crucial that we have a common understanding of what are the key points of those. So I should explain, I think, that this committee is unique in the sense that it deals with the most diverse range of topics that we have across the council, other than probably full council itself. So its works programme is certainly punctuated by a whole range of topics, you know, from the police, community safety, water quality, when working with Anglian Water, and flooding, the corporate plan, the budget and project delivery monitoring. Those are the kind of things that punctuate our work programme. You will have seen that already. So it generally makes a very interesting committee to be on, but it's also very challenging to get our heads around new subjects and focus on the key issues of concern. So what I want to do really is to just look at some of the key points that I believe in that training module need to be pulled out and just emphasize and so that we can all move forward together in a collective team. So the points I really want to make, the first one is political neutrality. That's absolutely crucial in my mind. If we are to work as a joined up team of scrutineers, then we need to leave our party politics outside the meeting room. We need to come here with a clear set of ideas, a clear set of principles on which we're going to work. And so that, as I said, team of scrutineers, we are keen to add value and to make sure that our business topics that we transact are properly done, and that we get the best results for North Norfolk residents. We're not another form of opposition. And we do provide a constructive blend of challenge and support by considering topics as pre-scrutiny, that's evolving topics and strategies before an executive decision is taken on them, or by giving them post-decision scrutiny. In both cases, we make recommendations to other committees, or to Cabinet, or to full council. We're not GRAC either. We have spoken about GRAC, and we've spoken about GRAC, the Governance, Risk and Audit Committee, dealing with certain matters to do with governance and risk. And it is the case that we sometimes split off aspects of topics which go forward to the Governance, Risk and Audit Committee. Making best use of our time. I aim to keep meetings to around 2 hours, but I need the cooperation of you, Cabinet members, offices, to support that aim. But what does that really mean in practice? Well, first of all, it means reading the meeting papers before we get here, so that we're all prepared. This enables Cabinet members, offices to only really need to present key points of the topics and anything which has changed since the papers were written. That condenses the amount of time that we need to spend on that. Keeping questions strategic and concise without making political or long statements. back to the political neutrality. Similarly, I look to cabinet members and officers to give concise and focused answers and not to stray into other areas or areas of topics that they may be particularly familiar with and may enjoy even talking about, but keep to those points which are germane to the question or germane to the paper. Deeper questions may well be appropriate, and there's where there is confusion or there's insufficient evidence to satisfy you in meeting your needs for information. Although there's always the option to continue discussions with officers and cabinet members outside of the meeting when you have a particular interest or award matter to raise. I will normally take questions from Overview and Scrutiny Committee members first, but if observing members have a contribution to make or a pertinent question, then I will often take them if that's helpful in progressing business, because I aim to keep discussions inclusive and on track with both topic and time. So they're the key points that I wanted to raise from the training module, the training package that you've already seen. I hope that's a set of points. Certainly it's a set of points that in the past 4 years we have generally observed. We've had a few transgressions from time to time, but they've been easy enough to deal with. And I think we've made progress in the way in which we transact our business here at this committee. But anybody have any questions on what I've raised so far? No? Then if we're able to move forward on that basis, that would be really helpful. And for me, that's a sufficient recap of the training. But we will from time to time have some refresher training as the need might arise. So if you're happy with that, we'll leave that at that point. Okay, moving on to item 11, appointment of representative and substitute for the Norfolk County Council, Norfolk Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Now, before I ask for nominations, I'm aware that we do have some guidance on this in the Constitution. So can I hand over to you, Matt, just to take us through that, please?
Yeah, so for these appointments, the following criteria will be applied when selecting members to appointments to outside bodies. Is the appointment relevant to any council responsibilities, portfolio holder, chairmanship, and in this example, membership of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, because it is an appointment to a scrutiny committee? Does the appointment bring skills and experience to the appointment or appointee bring those? So if people have relevant experience working in that sector or knowledge, does the appointee have the time and resource available to devote to the role? I note that we would like to, whoever is appointed, receive updates on what is discussed at the NHOS committee on a regular basis. Does the appointee have a low likelihood of conflicts of interest? Has there been any expression of preference approval from the outside body? I can say they've just asked for someone from the scrutiny committee. What is the term of the appointment? I believe that lasts until that committee at NCC is essentially reformed following the county council election. And all appointments to outside bodies must be included in the appointed members' register of interest. And then finally, just to note that, of course, we are after an appointee and a substitute today. So it'll be two members we require.
Yes, okay, thank you very much for that. And from my recollection, certainly from this committee's point of view, in business that we've transacted so far, we have certainly the ambulance response times as being an active topic with that committee. And I'm also mindful that we have issues in the district in particular around the coverage of provision and availability of dental care. And I think one could go mental health, and there are some public health issues. So they're generally the kind of pieces of business that are likely to figure in the role of representing Norfolk District Council and this committee in particular on that committee. So I think that's a fair description of that. So having done that, can I ask for nominations then, please? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can I nominate Jill Boyle, please, for the representative of the was it Norwich Hosk? Norfolk Hosk, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, so this would be to fill the representative role, not the substitute. Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for that?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate someone as well. I'd like to nominate Councillor Dr. Victoria Holiday.
Okay, thank you. Any other nominations? Sorry, seconder? Right, and do you have a seconder? Okay, right, okay, we've got two candidates. Can we have a show of hands for the nomination of Councillor Boyle? Six. Okay. Can I have a show of hands for Councillor Holiday? You can vote yourself.
That's five, including yourself.
Right, okay, so that nomination goes to Councillor Boyle. Welcome to that role. Can I then ask for nominations for substitutes, please? A substitute, please. Councillor Vickers.
Chair, before we carry on, can I just make the point that Councillor Dr. Holiday is actually a qualified medical doctor and therefore eminently suitable for either the role that's just been voted on or to be a substitute.
Chairman, I was just going to say that given that we require two appointments as effectively an appointee and a substitute, and you've had a vote on both, is it not worthwhile just to appoint Victoria as the substitute?
Well, of course, that does depend on the willingness of Councillor Holiday to do that. But I think, just to answer your point, I think we have gone through that process, and I'm not sure that it would be helpful to kind of go through, if you like, the respective merits or otherwise in this meeting right now. So if we can move on to the matter of substitutes, can I have a proposer then for a substitute?
Chair, I think you've had a proposer. I think Councillor Liz Vickers said that Dr. Holiday was qualified and therefore she would propose her as a substitute in this role.
Okay, well, that's any other?
Do you wish to maintain that position, Councillor Vickers?
Is that confirmed?
I have substituted before, so I'm happy to continue.
You were.
Substituted
Right,
before.
okay, thank you. And you wish, and you will willing to continue?
Yes, Chairman, I am. Thank
Okay,
you.
that's fine. Just to confirm that. Any other nominations for substitute? No? Okay. In the event of there being no other candidates, then you are the substitute for that role. So thank you for that. Right.
May I just,
Sorry.
I was
Councillor Boyle.
going to suggest, might it be pertinent in 12 months to see how things were going?
Sorry, can you turn the microphone nearer to you?
There we are. I was just going to say, after 12 months, we could review it again. If everyone's happy, then I will continue. Otherwise, we could do a swap after 12 months. I don't know how appropriate that is, but
It essentially have a review, you mean?
review.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, and I have a scientific background.
That would be, I think, the opportune time to do
Yeah.
that.
Is that fair?
All right.
Yeah.
You comfortable with that? Thank you. Right, moving on then to item 12, that's the draft work programme. Matt, would you like to speak to this?
Yep, I'll just bring up the necessary page. Bear with me. Okay, members, so what you have before you is essentially a draft work programme for the year ahead. There is quite a lot of work in that already. Prior to, we haven't seen a corporate plan yet, and there will of course be kind of projects and various things that come out of that which will no doubt be added to the work programme in due course. So what you're doing today is essentially approving a draft that does remain flexible. Work programme items will always change to some extent as items slip or new projects appear that require scrutiny. There is also within at the bottom of the report, there are some additional items there which we would check if you're kind of comfortable to approving. We can look to slot those into the work programme in due course. So they relate to Anglian Water sewage outflows. So we're aware that that has been a particular issue for the district. We did call Anglian Water into a meeting before to explain other issues, and we ended up doing a site visit at a water treatment facility. There's also been a request from full council that the scrutiny committee monitors Anglian Water's work on an annual basis. So I think that is something we need to look to put into the work programme at some point. The next item, obviously the council has made a commitment to achieving net zero carbon emissions. We therefore have a net zero action plan, which was reviewed by the committee prior to the election. I think we need to look at adding that to be a kind of annual monitoring report to see where we are, what is being done, if there's any kind of further spending. I note that yesterday at GRAC there was an outstanding audit recommendation that related to the planning service improvement plan. That is again something that the committee essentially commenced, set in motion. I would expect that would come back and we can look to slot that in to one of the earlier slots, I think, to try and get that audit recommendation closed off. Next is coastal. I think we had, again, prior to the election, we had a kind of coastal update from the team. Of course, there is now a much larger programme in place with the Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme. So if everyone's agreeable to that, I think it'd be helpful to have an update on that and see how it's going. And then finally on there, there's the public convenience strategy follow-up. I note that, again, prior to the election, we had a scrutiny panel that looked at public conveniences, made recommendations about how they could be improved. Those recommendations were accepted. So I think perhaps sometime later in this municipal year, we can look at that and see how much of those recommendations have been implemented, if there's any kind of further things that need to be revisited. I would say beyond that, I have said, obviously, we will have items that pop up throughout the year related to the corporate plan and other projects. If there is anything throughout the year, the overview and scrutiny agenda does have an item 8 provision for any issue to be raised by a member. So if there's ever anything that you feel does need to go on the agenda, you can raise that with myself, Democratic Services Manager, and we will look to, if it's appropriate, we can look to have that on the agenda and then potentially added to the work programme for investigation. There are other ways as well. We've had previously councillor call for action. So we've looked at second homes in that respect and the impact of second homes. So there are many ways that things can be added to the work programme. This is just the kind of first draft, an initial look at what we'll be looking at over the year ahead. And yeah, I'll leave it to you for any comments, questions, and to approve.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it's just worth mentioning the work that we would transact it. I mean, I guess it falls into two categories in a way. There's the regulatory items which are there, which we have to do on an annual or a quarter or a 6 monthly basis. And so they make up a fair amount of what we do. And then we've got those items that can come from various sources. But I think it's important that we understand what our mission statement is. So that's the statement at paragraph 2. And then we've got that breakdown of the topic, understanding what the timely organizational priority, the public interest, the influence that we have, and the cost associated with work that we do. It's important that we measure any proposals that we have against those items so that we are confident that we are taking on a piece of work that is entirely appropriate. Under the public interest there is one other item that another route that a piece of business can come to the committee, and my understanding that is through a public petition.
Yes, indeed. As you'll see from the start of the agenda, we do receive public petitions. It's not very often. They have to meet a specific threshold, a number of signatures of people within the district. But yes, absolutely. If members of the public are interested in placing something on the agenda, they can petition us. And with the right level of support, we can debate that.
Thank you. And my other comment really is in connection with the paragraph 3, where you've listed those pieces of work. And of course, when we get further down, further through the year, we will begin to see that work program build, and we will probably reach a point, if the last 4 years is anything to go by, we will reach a point where we will have to consider whether we can actually handle that business in a better way. And often, well, I say often, we've had discussions about the use of start and finish work groups. And I think that the use of that with regard to the public convenience was a positive experience, and it does add capacity to what the committee can consider. It does enable a smaller group to go down into a level of detail that's not normally possible at our committee meetings. So that's always an option there to propose that we reform or we form a start and finish group to handle any business that might be appropriate. So any comments or questions on what we've got before us? Councillor Vickers and then Councillor Holliday.
If I could take a step back, Chair, as a new member, I was really surprised to find out that our accounts going back as far as 2021 haven't been signed off and verified. Now, I don't doubt the competence and integrity of our finance team, but the point is, for me as a new member, I feel without those accounts, it underpins everything that we do, that I'm in effect whistling in the dark. Everyone on this committee may act in good faith, but until we have those verifiable accounts, it is very, very difficult to make precise decisions. So I would just like an assurance. At GRAC yesterday, we were told that there was going to be a chart and timetable. I would just like an assurance that that's going to be a very robust timetable, and it's going to be regularly reviewed, a robust and ambitious timetable, and it's going to be regularly reviewed.
Thank you. You raise a very good point, and I'm sure it was a point that was discussed yesterday. It was certainly raised in the GRAC training session yesterday morning. I don't know whether it was discussed in any detail in the meeting, but I think I would probably look to Officer Stankley to respond with regard to that.
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, we did discuss it at GRAC yesterday, and there are reasons at both local level within the district and also at national level with external auditors for the delay in signing off the accounts. We have met recently with the external auditor and have put a plan in place to sign off the 2021, which is only outstanding on one item. And we hope to have that meeting and complete that and then sign off after the end of this week on the 2021. The 21-22, we are looking to audit those accounts in August or earlier if the external auditors can find a slot for us, and they will then be signed off after that. And then the 22-23, which we were due to publish at the end of May this year. They're not, because we haven't finalised the 21, 22 and 2021 been able to publish, but the auditor is aware of that, and the plan is to have those completed as soon as possible after the sign off of the 21, 22, and we will then have those audited and brought to GRAC in December 23. So we will be fully caught up and back on plan. I mean, in terms of your concerns. They're my concerns as well, because we don't know the financial position that we are in, you know, not accurately in terms of levels of reserves. And, you know, our overall position, it's not a position that I'm happy with being in nor comfortable with being in. And that's why we've got this plan in place to catch up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, is it fair to describe the situation as we are up to date with regard to unaudited accounts?
Well, yes, it is. So yes, for unaudited accounts, the year-end accounts have been prepared for 2021 and 21-22. We would be due to have, under the requirements, we should have prepared our final account for 2022-23, so the year ending the 31st of March this year, at the end of May. Previously, that has the requirement for local government was to prepare those accounts for July of each year, and I think in 2019, so the year before COVID, that was brought forward to the 31st of May. So that has been a challenging deadline for many local authorities, hindered by the pandemic. So the situation around our unaudited accounts is, as Mrs. Stankley has advised, that and I commented yesterday to the Governance Risk and Audit Committee, there was a challenge to the accounts in 2019-20, which has been well discussed and reported and presented by the external auditor at GRAC meetings in March 2022. So those accounts are now correctly audited and signed off. But because that work needed to be completed first, that's delayed the audit processes for the following years, 2020-21 and 2021-22. So those are the audits which are now ongoing, and Mrs. Stankley has outlined the external audit processes which are in train to bring those processes to a conclusion. Since appointment last November, Mrs. Stankley has looked at the capacity of the finance team. It wasn't just that we replaced or appointed Mrs. Stankley. We also had a vacancy we were carrying for a chief technical accountant. And so Mrs. Stankley has reviewed the staffing within the team, and various appointments are being made, or recruitment processes are in hand at the present time to strengthen the team. So to conclude, yeah, that we've submitted we've completed unaudited annual budgets or closed down for 2021, 22, and we should be concluding the 22-23 final accounts at this time. And Mrs. Stankley has processes in place to do that.
To cut a long story
Thank
short,
you.
I think it's probably fair to say that this organisation is doing what it can to deliver on the requirements of accounting provisions, and the external audit, the auditing of them is where the principal hold-up is. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just in brief, at the meeting yesterday, officers kindly have agreed to give us a chart that will lay out when things should have happened, when they will happen, reasons for delay, and progress forward, and therefore we will be able to track that we move along that line, and the provision of resources. So I think we're in a place where everybody does want to get this back on track, and I think we have a mechanism by which to track it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. But it was a good point to raise, and you've obviously had a fairly full explanation of where we are and why we are where we are. Okay. Councillor Adams.
I just wanted to say, refer particularly new members to, well, really nearly every local government journal over the past few weeks. I know, and certainly the NJ, most recently there was quite a big article about the delays nationally in audits, and some of the decisions that may have to be made to speed that up, because there is a very big backlog, which certainly no fault of the local government sector itself, but it's happening everywhere, I'm afraid. But
Yeah.
certainly have a look at those articles. There's plenty of them around.
That's recognised. Yep. Any other points in relation to the work programme that we have before us? Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. I was just interested, we're confirming the work programme. Does that include the to be confirmed items that you have at the end, which are Anglia Water, etc.? Because these are as important as the ones that actually are recurring and expected. And in fact, I would say perhaps we should prioritise
Yeah,
these items, because I would say Anglia Water and sewage is just as important as beach huts and chalets. In fact, they go together quite nicely, don't they? So I would absolutely be on for them. The planning service improvement plan, I would say, needs to come back twice yearly, because that's a really important part of our outward facing performance.
Yeah, so those proposals, I would say, I just haven't put those into a specific date, but as long as there's no dissenters amongst the committee and you're happy to approve, then I'll happily add all of those proposals into the work programme as soon as I can.
And I know I'm straying into NHOSC here, but I would say add dentistry, because that's just as bad as ambulance response times at the moment. So if we're concerned, there's geographical elements to dental deserts, and I think we need to be looking at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that there are drivers that will determine the priority, and they will be around a number of issues, not least of which will be events that have been scheduled into the work programme. Well, not the work programme, but a particular, for example, the planning improvement project will have certain milestones in it, and they will then that piece of work will be scheduled into the work programme as we reach those milestones. So there are things like that. I saw another hand. Yes, Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I acknowledge that a lot of the work programme is going to be taken up by my portfolio. And if there's a way that we can work together to maximise the time that I take during the meetings to enable time for these other very important matters as well, I'm happy to work with you to try and figure out how we can best do that.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. I think it's probably fair to say that we've not had too much of a problem in the past. I think in some of them we've been able to process quite quickly. But I think there might well be a kind of feeding in process for new members in particular. And so we'll see how that one goes, but thank you for that. Any other comments on the work programme? Are you happy then to accept this work programme? Could I have a proposal?
Just, sorry, ask if obviously Victoria's proposed that we seek to look at dentistry as well and the issues faced by the district and across the country. Is there wide support for that, essentially? Is there a seconder for that proposal to be added to the work programme?
Then we can add that. I think that would that's something we can do almost at any time to add those sort of topics in. So don't be afraid.
I expect it would be something that we would just refer. Initially, you would debate it and refer it to NHOSC, who may have some work on that already, but that would be the starting process, as it was with the ambulance response times.
Yes. Well, in fact, I raised it with Councillor Boyle. That's a live topic, or likely to be a live topic, and may well occupy some time on the NHOSC. Right. Okay. Can I have a proposal then? We accept the work programme and a seconder. Councillor Fisher to propose, Councillor Penfold to second. Can I have a show of hands, please? That looks like unanimous. Thank you very much. Right. Moving on then to item 13. Item 13 is the purchase of 2 additional refuse collection vehicles. So that's pages 29 to 36. Councillor Ringer, do you wish to present on this, open it on this?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. Just as a little bit of a summary of this paper, essentially the report is outlining the requirement to provide 2 additional refuse vehicles. These are specifically for our commercial trade waste collections and our garden waste collections. These are a statutory requirement. We do have to provide these services, but we are able to levy a charge for those. The reason we find ourselves in this situation actually is relatively a good one, because our performance in these areas has been good. We have increased our garden waste subscribers by around 1,000 per year for the last 5 years. And during that same period, we've seen a 50% increase in trade collections, with the exception of the year of COVID, where obviously many of our trade customers were prohibited from trading at all. Because we're required to make this service, or to provide this service, we aren't in a position to start turning people away, and we need to be able to adequately resource that without having implications for our domestic rounds as well. Many of our trade customers are collected as part of our domestic rounds, and building these into the domestic rounds does obviously increase the risk of miscollections with on the domestic rounds, which is obviously something we want to avoid. That is convenient in some circumstances. For example, holiday lets usually have a conventional 240 litre bin, which would look very much like a household bin and be collected in the same manner. But for the larger trade customers, obviously, they are providing more waste, and that gives the risk of a heavier vehicle needing to unload more frequently, and the crews therefore running out of time. So there are implications for the domestic round, although this isn't designed specifically to sort out any issues that we have there. There will be a knock-on effect from that. We have, the reason this is coming before us now as well is because we have the opportunity to use Serco's pre-allocated build slots. So the lead out time for acquiring these new vehicles would be reduced by possibly as much as 12 months by using these. If we were to try and acquire these vehicles ourselves, we would still be waiting for them possibly the end of next summer, as opposed to the end of this year. So time is of the essence on that front, and I think that is possibly part of the reason why this paper is coming towards us at this point rather than perhaps earlier in the year. And that's all I'd like to say in way of summary at the start. I'm happy to take any questions alongside officers.
Okay, thank you. First question from me, I think. Do you have a cost benefit analysis that demonstrates the very positive story that you've just explained?
It's not included in the papers, but we have got some figures which I'm not sure are allowed to be in the public domain. I'm going to look at officers for that. There was a discussion yesterday about whether these should be in purple papers. And perhaps officer colleagues would like to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Is that something you've seen?
I've seen some information that backs that up. For example, this is just, rather than giving the raw data, I'm able to say things along the lines of the garden waste collections have increased by about 1,000 each year, and that is over a period of 5 or 6 years. So it's not there's not a volatility in that, if you see what I mean. We are seeing a continual increase in subscribers, and the same with the trade lifts. The danger is, of course, that we start losing customers as a result of not being able to carry out the adequate service. So it's imperative really that we acquire these vehicles so we can carry on the good service that we have had up to now, as particularly on trade waste, in which we're operating in a competitive market.
I think we get the picture on demand. I think we probably need to move over to officers and
so
Officer Hems.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of cost benefit for providing these vehicles, there are some there are figures around the cost of a vehicle. There are figures around our current customer base. I think in terms of cost benefit, we need to bear in, or from an officer point of view, Serco are providing this service already. So effectively, Serco are contracted to provide a service to us based on the number of customers we provide them, whether that be for the household waste collections or for our paid for services, i.e. in this case, garden waste and trade commercial waste services. So Serco are out there collecting garden bins from new customers. They are able to charge an amount per customer for each customer they service. The issue is that Serco are currently providing the garden waste vehicle. It is a hired vehicle on the contract, and the contract says that the district council, Schedule 8, Part 8 of the contract says the district council provides the vehicles. So we did that on the basis of transferring risk or avoiding risk, both in terms of purchase vehicle cost and in terms of if something happened to the contract or the contractor, we would own the vehicles so that we could continue to provide the service. So this is not a proposal before you to say we ought to buy these because there is a position around, you know, a strict cost benefit, although that is there. The position is that what we are doing is meeting contractual obligations to provide vehicles under the contract, under the Schedule 8 of the contract around authority plant, to meet a demand that we have generated through additional customers to our garden waste scheme. In terms of the trade waste provision, there are two aspects to it. Serco we have been very successful, and I think customer numbers have increased from around 88,000 in 2016, 2017. Bin lifts. So 88,000 bin lifts per annum. We're now doing 130,000 bin lifts per annum. So that's us, and we charge per lift. So from that perspective, we've grown our service massively. In order to cope with that, Serco are providing additional resource into the waste, into the trade waste specifically, but they have put additional lifts, as Councillor Ringer has said, into the domestic rounds. And as you will be aware, since the provision of since the change under the target operating model that Serco introduced, we have seen a continued lack of completion of rounds on their scheduled day, which we are still working hard to try and overcome. So effectively, this would see some of those trade waste collections that are done on domestic rounds move to a dedicated trade service. It also does give us capacity to continue to grow trade waste and retain customers on our trade waste contract. There are other competitors in that market, and so if we don't provide a reliable service, clearly those competitors are likely, or those customers are likely to look to competitors. And so it's important we retain a quality service. So there is not per se a business case in terms of strict figures, because as Councillor Ringer said, we are statutorily obliged to provide the service. This is about meeting demand. Serco are currently providing those vehicles or that service via a different means, but it has an implication in terms of both delivery of service and also in terms of our ability to deliver a quality service to our residents on domestic rounds.
Just to clarify what you've just said, am I correct in saying that we supply the vehicles and Serco deliver the service using our vehicles?
So yes, Serco specify the vehicles, Serco obtain the vehicles. Once Serco have warranted that they're fit for purpose, that basically we pay and we have ownership of those vehicles. So the current fleet that we have out there, so the refuse vehicles that you see driving around that have grey cabs on them, they are owned by North Norfolk District Council. They are maintained, fueled, serviced, driven by Serco as the contractor.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions in relation to this business? Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have, in terms of what you said, Officer Hems, obviously I think it sounds like there is a compelling case for the vehicles. My concern, though, is with the papers that presented to the cabinet in terms of, and effectively they made a decision off the back of those papers. I take what you said about the business case, but in terms of the trade waste, that is a commercial enterprise, as you say, because there are other competitors in the market. Indeed, as you said in GRAC yesterday afternoon, you want NNDC to be effectively the prime mover in that market and effectively take all of that business. So I think that there is an argument to be made, at least for that element, for some form of business case, albeit if it goes into purple papers, because I appreciate it would be commercially sensitive. The other area of considerable concern to me is actually how we are going to fund this. £450,000 in district council budgets is a significant sum of money. However you look at it, and if you look at the figures we've got in front of us, it's not clear where the money is going to come from. We've had sort of, Officer Stankley's mentioned we may borrow money from either externally or internally, but I'd have thought before the cabinet made a decision on that, you want to understand it precisely where that's going to come from. Also, what the impacts of that funding will be if we're taking money from other areas which had earmarked reserves towards them. The other point I'd make, even that area particularly, is that there are lots of pots of money in the earmark reserve for all sorts of things in there which may not be used. Well, there may be a debate to be had. Well, actually, could it be more usefully used to buy these vehicles as opposed to sitting in a bank account for the next 5 years? So I think that, and the other thing around the cost side is actually when those costs will be incurred, and that's not actually in here at all. Is it going to be incurred this financial year, next financial year, or even the year after? And again, that would be, I think, useful information for us to actually have. And the other thing, as I just mentioned, is was referred to GRAC. Well, it came as a surprise, I know, when I attended the cabinet meeting to the cabinet members that this was raised then. I think if you put in the papers explanations why it's suddenly arisen now, because you said in if you go to 7.1 on page 33, collection services have struggled over the last 6 months. Well, if we knew about it 6 months ago, the argument was, well, why wasn't this raised and included in this year's annual budget, which I have to say we only agreed and signed off in March fully, so not that long ago. So I do think there's concerns there, and I wouldn't certainly, as a committee, for us, I think we need to understand how this is actually going to be funded, and indeed where the cost will be incurred, when they'll be incurred. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll cover the borrowing aspects, funding elements. The vehicles will be funded from monies that we're going to receive back from Serco as part of their non-performance compensation, which is written into the contract. And we propose that we'll take £50,000 of that to put towards funding, and the remainder of the funding, which is in line with the way in which we've purchased all the other vehicles, will be through borrowing from the PWLB Loans Board, which gives us preferential rates as local authority. That's where most local authorities take their funding from. If we do indeed actually need to take external borrowing, it may be that we are able to use our cash reserves, as we have significant levels of investment, to borrow internally, in which case we wouldn't incur any interest costs. I don't see that it would be a case of other schemes losing out, because we would be borrowing to fund this, and also the money that comes from the non-performance compensation payments is required to be put back into the service to help future improvements in the service, which is what we're doing in using this amount. With regard to earmarked reserves, we do have several earmarked reserves, and they are set aside for specific purposes. And so we wouldn't be taking anything from those earmarked reserves for this purchase here. Oh, I'm sorry, just coming back to the time when we would take the borrowing. If we were borrowing, we would take borrowing the year in which, after the year in which the acquisition is made. So I did apologise at GRAC yesterday, as I misunderstood what was in the report. I thought we would be taking the vehicles in 12 to 15 months time. So I think I quoted 25, 26. We were actually able to acquire the vehicle in November. of this year. So we would take our borrowing in the next financial year and start repaying that in 24-25.
Thank you for that. I guess the point I'm making, the information you just give us would have been more usefully included, I think, in the report, so the cabinet members would have had that information to hand when they made the decision, not being given verbally after the event in response to a question from a member. And I think going forward, that's something I would encourage the cabinet to do. Is I think that they're making decisions on large financial sums here. You really do need to probe and challenge where the money's coming from and how it's going to be, even if there is a compelling case, which there may well be in this instance for the two vehicles. Thank you.
Yes, I'll note that and take that forward in further reports.
Officer Martin, would you wish to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the sort of cost benefit analysis, and I think, Christopher, this will answer your question somewhat as well. The legislation, as Councillor Ringer pointed out, these are statutory services that we have to deliver on request. But the legislation also gives us the ability to make a charge for those services as well, and a charge that should cover the costs of delivering those services. This will obviously increase our costs. Over the last few years, the success of those services has at times returned quite a considerable surplus at year end, which has gone into the general reserve, is my understanding. We hope to continue that success through the growth of the services and continue that position moving forward. In terms of the timing of the paper, it was unfortunate. I think we all recognise that the Serco round reorganisation combined with management changes on their side did not necessarily give us the timeline that we had hoped to work to with them, and we didn't want to bring forward a paper asking for money when we did not necessarily know whether that was going to be required or not. And it was, yeah, obviously not until April that position from Serco was confirmed.
If I might, it just comes back to the point, put the information into the report so members can see it. So obviously that will, it went to GRAC yesterday. If we had more information in there, it may not need to have gone to GRAC yesterday. So that's the point I'm making.
I think some of the metrics that you mention around the benefits of you know, the additional work that you've been able to do and what's been kind of paid into our reserves would be a useful dimension to illustrate that point without going to the extent of a what you might call a more detailed business case or a cost benefit analysis. Thank you. I've got Councillor Holliday and then Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Chair. Officer Hems, we've discussed before the appalling performance of the waste contract in my area anyway, and the performance related compensation that you were going to get. And I was under the impression that it was going to be quite high, a couple of 100,000, I think. And 50,000 seems quite a derisory amount to spend towards this, actually, if there is more money coming. And I think the 50,000 refers to 21-22, but is there more money coming for 22-23? Thanks very much.
So the position we're in is the 50,000 that's been referred to relates to the 21-22 settlement that has been allocated at this current time. The level that is likely in terms of the performance management framework of the contract, so the deductions we are able to make around non-performance, has not yet been agreed between the three authorities, because it is a contract that involves the three authorities and Serco. It's still an ongoing discussion that is live. Clearly, there is likely to be payment. I don't know what that value is likely to be, but it is, you know, there is a potential for it to be higher than the 50,000 that we've received in respect of previous years. But I don't want to, you know, better our position in relation to the ongoing discussions and negotiations in that. The agreement that is being put in place over those performance management framework deductions is that it will be placed by each authority into an innovation fund, and it is for the authorities to look at bringing forward, well, Serco can bring forward ideas that improve the service beyond that is required as part of the contractual obligations of Serco. And so we will look at things that come forward in relation to that. And we also have the ability to look at where we could improve the service as well. So we can make nominations, etc., into that. So it's not as simple as just going, we have a load of money, we'll put it towards this, because there is a reasonable expectation under the contract that it will go towards innovation across a number of areas. And so that is, we're not in a position just to allocate money at this time from an amount that we currently don't know what it will be. But I take your point, and there may well be an ability to look at some funding being taken from that to offset against any potential borrowing.
Thank you, Officer Hems. That's very helpful, but I find it difficult to apply this money, which has been obtained by not performing to the contract standard that we have, towards contract standard that we can't even aspire to. It'd be quite nice to get the service that we would and used to have and would expect, rather than putting the money towards a fund that would get you to even higher level of service. It seems to me that's a little bit aspirational, but any improvement is much welcomed. Thank you.
You wish to add anything to that?
Well, we're not going to, I mean, put simply, we're not going to use any funding to improve the contractual requirements that Serco need to meet. And so we cannot, you know, the agreement in order to reach a settlement in respect of that funding with the authorities was such that it would go towards an innovation fund, and that would effectively mean that we were in a position where we could use it for service enhancements. So yes, there is a possibility that we could use it for purposes including additional vehicles where it improves the service beyond the requirements of the contract. But I do take on board Councillor Holliday's point, which is that, you know, before we start investing in additionality, we need the service delivering. But I would take the view that actually, if we can invest in something that reduces the burden on Serco or improves the service, then that in effect takes the burden off the other elements. So in this respect, you know, the trade waste vehicle, absolutely Serco are responsible for delivering the domestic rounds. But if we continue to sell additional trade lifts and their capacity is taken on the trade vehicles such that their only option is to put them onto the domestic rounds, that does not help with a domestic round that is, or you know, is struggling to complete, because it just puts additional burden on them. So that is a service improvement from my point of view, although it's not meeting their contractual obligation, because we are improving a different part of the service that we have. You know, we ultimately sell to customers those trade lifts. We have generated a significant number of additional trade lifts that generates us income, but it puts pressure on Serco. I wouldn't be coming forward for any request for vehicles other than those for chargeable service, where we are wholly responsible for the success of that service in terms of selling product effectively to customers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howard.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thanks for that. I mean, that's the most succinct statement I've heard, and that should have been in this report, because it would have made life a lot clearer. I mean, if we've generated the reason they need this vehicle, that's quite succinct and quite positive. My main query is the fact that we've had Serco directors and managers in this room in overview and scrutiny meetings where they've openly admitted they do not have a strategy, they do not have a strategic plan, they do not have crisis management. And it seems strange to me, I accept we've been the reason behind generating this, that it has to come forward to a committee like this by basically your admission as a crisis only arising in April, when we should have been looking at a strategic plan on this And if we're looking to generate more trade waste, and I'm perfectly behind that, then, you know, we should be far much further ahead of the curve. So I'm not getting twitchy about 400,000 again. That's the point. But I think we should just be ahead of the curve on these things. And if we're generating more business, let's grasp it and make the most of it. But also, I think we do need to get back to Serco, because if their main beef was that they couldn't get drivers, then they couldn't get enough employees to service the rounds. If that situation is still the case, you know, we need to be focusing on that as well as focusing on what I understand to be 2 new vehicles. Thank you.
Fair point.
Yes, absolutely. And obviously the focus for us as you will understand, as officers, and, you know, I know Officer Martin and his team have worked incredibly hard around trying to address the issues that have come about through a introduction of a round and route optimization, which has generated issues, but also has been compounded by a ongoing pay dispute between Serco and its workforce, which has now been, I'm pleased to say, resolved. In terms of that, you know, the rates of pay for Serco employees are such that I do not consider that they should have difficulty in attracting suitable candidates for any vacancies in the future. So I think, you know, absolutely take on board your comments, Councillor Housden. You're right. We need to get ahead of the curve. Actually, what's before you today is part of, certainly in the trade waste and to a degree the garden waste vehicle, is about getting ahead of the curve. Because if we don't provide the vehicles, Serco will provide a vehicle, which they currently are. It's likely to be either a higher vehicle, so it won't be branded as an NDC, which is not a brilliant advert for paid for service. It might be an older, it's probably a higher vehicle, so it might be an older vehicle. Some of the higher vehicles and certainly stuff that Serco might bring in off old contracts are less likely to be reliable. Again, I'm trying to get ahead of the curve in this by providing vehicles that are suitable, and we are able to use to, you know, any capacity in terms of sweating those assets in order to both deliver a quality service, but give us an ability to actually be ahead of the curve in terms of selling further business.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't a direct criticism at you by any means. You know my feelings about Serco.
I didn't take it as one, Councillor.
Fine, okay. It's just that I do feel that, you know, within that contract, they should be looking further ahead, much further ahead. Thank you very much, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ringo, do you want to follow on that point?
I was just going to, welcome Councillor Housden's comments about having a strategic view, and it's something that I share. Although not directly related to this report, we are awaiting the outcome of the government consultation on the standardisation of waste collections. And I think that will provide us with possibly some challenges, but I think some opportunities to, you know, take on a strategic approach once that is with us. It should have been out with us in April, but we're still waiting for it. So hopefully that will give us the opportunity to take that strategic approach. It's something I really want to be able to take.
Thank you.
Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly support Councillor Housden there, I think, in his comments. Just a more sort of straightforward practical question. For how long is the quote valid for the 2 vehicles in terms of, I guess, putting the order in? If we do that within a certain time, we may save the contingency which allocated for potential cost increases, for example. Thank you.
The quote that the paper was based on was valid until about the middle of May. So we have built in a contingency. I did mention, I think, during the cabinet meeting that the price of these vehicles, they are very, very similar vehicles to those we bought in 2020. The cost is now about £50,000 higher per vehicle than it was in 2020. We've built in a small contingency, but I don't expect there'll be a great movement, if any.
I think, sorry, just to come back on that. So what we were in exactly the same position when we were looking at acquiring the fleet for contract mobilisation. Serco were only able to hold a price for 7 days. Clearly, in terms of us as a district council, in terms of committee process, that's an impossibility. What we actually saw was that in general, across most of the vehicles, the price that Serco, because they're a big, you know, we're not the only contract they run across Norfolk. They are bidding for new contracts. They are reletting contracts. One of the reasons they're able to hold build slots for us is because they book build slots. They have so many vehicles that they purchase that they book build slots with this manufacturer, and they just shuffle them around accordingly. So from that perspective, it's not as if they're going out and saying we'd just like to buy 2 vehicles. They have an ongoing relationship. So what we saw when we had the original fleet purchase was that actually most of the vehicles were less than actually they'd been quoted, and certainly not significantly more. There is volatility because obviously a lot of vehicle parts and stuff come from the European Union, and we're subject to the vagaries of exchange rates, etc. But I would expect that there wouldn't be a vast difference that would be catered for within the contingency amounts being allowed.
Thank you for that. I mean, the contingency is 15,000 there as a note on the papers, but the quote as presented to us is already out of date. So I think just for perhaps a bit more certainty around how much this might cost, whether we were able to, if we go for that build slot in November, presumably Serco could provide us with a cost for that as a target build date. And I think that certainly calm any nerves there might be about potential volatility, because you make a good point there, Steve.
Once funding is approved and confirmed, the order will be submitted, so the price will be firmed up at that point. So once the order is placed, the price will not change. Even if we get the vehicles delivered in November, the price we agree at the point of order is the price that is paid.
I guess what I'm saying though is you're asking us to agree a price that we don't know.
The difficulty is that when we get a price, it'll probably be valid for 7 days, and so we can't come back to you every 7 days and say the price is now this. I think that's the case in a lot of things that are agreed. There is price fluctuation in them. That's why there is a contingency being allowed. I'm happy if we look like there is a significant risk of that contingency, being tight, to come back at that point. But ultimately, we could get you a price that might be different, and in 7 days after that, they might come back with one that's dropped by a significant amount. And that's the challenge. That I understand your desire to understand the price in more detail, but I just think from a practicality point of view, it would be relatively meaningless as a new figure.
Okay, I didn't realise the quote was valid for such a short time, but that's quite unusual for, usually a little bit longer than that, but you will know better than me on that one.
It's almost like a spot market.
Apparently the last one was 30 days it was valid for, but when we purchased the first fleet, they were giving us 7-day validity on those quotes.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the reassurance about if the contingency does need to, if it is significantly different. I think that's, yep.
Okay. And finally,
Steve, just a quick question. Those bin lifts, 88,000 up to 130, I think you said. Do we have any idea of the potential that could be there beyond that 130? It's not a trick question. I'm just looking at what the potential might be looking in the future.
So the answer is yes, but no. And the reason for that is that although it's 130,000 bin lifts, we offer a whole load of different parameters in terms of size of bins and everything else. So a 240-litre bin, obviously, you can load a lot more into a vehicle in terms of capacity than you could 1100 bin. And so yeah, I could give you or Scott could probably give you a ballpark of capacity, but then again, we also collect into the domestic rounds. So if it's a 240 litre bin, then in theory, it's easy to collect on a domestic round and collect it every fortnight because the vehicle's already going past. If someone's got a holiday let 240 litre bin, then it probably makes sense from a net zero point of view to continue that. If they're collecting 1100s at the moment, a number of those are going onto those domestic rounds, but effectively it would make sense to take those off those rounds and do them via a separate collection, often because the frequency is different or customers want a different day. So I couldn't give you an accurate picture that wouldn't just be me sticking a finger in the air. Officer Martin might tell me I'm completely wrong, but
I think maybe we should leave it there. Sure. Yeah, that's the bigger point, I think. Okay, are we all done on this matter? Can I have a proposer and a seconder then for this piece? Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Fisher. Can I have a show of hands, please? Those in favour, looks like it's unanimous. Thank you. Right, okay, moving on to item 14 then. Which is the managing performance Q4 and cumulatively for 22-23.
Yes.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you. So as you can see, good progress towards meeting objectives again in the last quarter. As has already been covered, the industrial dispute between Serco and Unison has been resolved, and focus in this area clearly is now on the service improvement, carbon reduction, and as you've heard, revenue growth in respect of services carried out for revenue return. I also understand we presently have around 65 households in temporary accommodation, so you can see those numbers remain extremely high in the context of this current housing crisis, which we expect to continue for some time. The works in North Walsham Town Centre, of course, completed ahead of schedule. And we now look forward to the completion of the Cedars and new public toilets and the works commencing on the Lokes, of course. No adverse ombudsman decisions in 22-23, which of course is very welcome, and work underway on the next carbon busting project, which received planning permission, of course, in the last quarter. And that, of course, is at Sheringham Reef, and of course, ongoing discussions in respect to the sea defence schemes at Munsley and Cromer. A lot of work has actually been completed towards various build and refurbishment projects in the district during that last quarter, which is very pleasing to see. And I'm pleased to see that continued funding for the community connectors has been highlighted specifically in the report. And these people obviously do some fantastic work for the organisation and very well received. So very well received. And I wanted to also mention in respect of the planning service improvement plan, which was briefly mentioned earlier on, I'm so pleased really with the exemplary performance of our planning department. And, you know, I do feel this is reflected in the report. And as you can see on the headline report, North Norfolk continues to perform very well in many respects. So I'm happy to recommend this report. And of course, thank you to Helen and others for contributing to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Just before I open it for questions, can you just on page 40 and 41, where you report the boosting business growth and sustainability. I know we haven't got the cabinet member here today, but I guess you will be in a position to tell us what evidence do we have that the North Walsham project has boosted business growth and sustainability so far? I'm asking question to councillor Adams. So do you know?
I'm sorry, I'm speaking without the microphone. I don't have access to the particular measures, and indeed I didn't manage to open the agenda in time to read the specific areas you mentioned. But I'm heartened that we've got low shopfront vacancy in North Walsham. And of course, as Lucy's just mentioned, we've seen new businesses open in the town. I'm very pleased to see the progress the town is making in planning community events. And, you know, I've visited the town centre on at least a couple of occasions now and seen it very, very busy with those, and long may that continue. That seems to be going very well. So I don't have data, I suppose, that I could describe to you. Of course, we have been collecting data on footfall and visits to the town centre, but I can't describe that to you in any detail without obviously diving into that, which would take me a few minutes. But I'm happy to defer to others to speak about this further. I do welcome the conversation that occurred earlier on. I think it would be helpful to have a visit to the town and see what's being achieved, what's occurring. And obviously I would encourage you to head down during one of the events. And I think there's the street food market coming up Saturday. So that's a very good example, I think, of how well the town is doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Turning then to somebody who does know.
It's not about knowing and not knowing. It's about having the absolute excitement to shout about what North Walsham is and will be in the future.
So time, so we can be quite precise about it.
Yes, absolutely. So we have seen 4 new businesses open since, I believe, November. One of those new businesses is previously in a unit which hasn't been used for anything commercial for quite some time, and it's not actually in the marketplace. It's on an offshoot of the marketplace on King's Arm Street, which is very exciting because it's showing that the commercial aspect of the high street is spreading outwards, whereas previously it's been shrinking. And we've had 2 national companies showing interest in the town. Unfortunately, the high street isn't big enough. So they're looking on the peripheries, which is very exciting. We've had approximately 3 retailers that I've spoken to who want to come to the high street, but there isn't the available units for them. So actually, the beneficial picture we have at the moment is that we don't have enough space to accommodate the commercial interest in the high street at the moment. Adding on to that, we've seen the massive increases to our bus services, with double the amount of buses running now to Norwich during the week, and Sunday and bank holiday bus services, which is meaning that any businesses who operate outside of the 9 to 5 can now get their workforce in and out of the town, which is really beneficial. And for our future workforce, it means that our young people across the district have got better access to City College in Norwich, which is building on the future economy of North Norfolk. So I could go into much more detail, but I think I've taken up enough time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, it would be helpful, I think, actually, if you could share some of your kind of enthusiasm or ideas about maybe some of that, if that could be included as some kind of metrics, some kind of evidence, that would be really helpful, because clearly statements are fine, but they do need to be evidenced by something which is more tangible. And I appreciate it might be early days yet, because the project obviously is relatively recent, but I would put that marker down, if you like, at some stage or other, for us to see something of a more tangible kind. That would be really helpful.
Come and visit us. That's the most tangibility you'll get.
Councillor Adams.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that I think perhaps we could understand this in the context of, you know, how the other towns are doing in terms of shopfront vacancy as well, because we've got a particular problem emerging now with the bank branches leaving the town centres, and they will all leave. It's an inevitability. We will be out without the existing high street bank branches at some point in future. So I'm particularly concerned for Fakenham and Cromer at the moment. You know, obviously we've seen the loss of M&Co, we've seen the loss of several banks. There's others to close. But it's just heartening, I think, to see North Walsham. It's certainly, well, I think as a whole, the district bucks that trend. We do have few shopfront vacancies, but certainly to see that in North Walsham, certainly bucking the trend, very low shopfront vacancies is a very good thing, I think.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Penfold, Councillor Housden, Councillor Holiday. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you. Just briefly, I think it's a good point about the context within the district and sort of benchmarking with other towns as well. That's interesting. But I think in terms of sustainability, there's something a bit more difficult to measure, maybe a bit more intangible, and that's a sort of sense of community pride and ownership and a feeling of wanting to be there. And I think that's, like I say, that's very difficult to measure, but in terms of conversations and meeting people and the events that we as North Walsham County Councillors were always involved in, there's a real uplift in that sort of sense of pride and belonging and wanting to, a lot of people coming in to visit North Walsham who haven't done that previously. So certainly in terms of a sustainable place to live, a good place to live, a happy place to live, that's all on the increase. Thank you.
I think you hit upon an interesting point. Sustainability is quite something, can kind of mean almost all things to all people in a sense, whereas boosting business growth is more tangible and ought to be something that you could present in some more dimensional form. And maybe today is not the day for that to happen, but perhaps in the future we could see some evidence of that. That would be really helpful. I'm conscious that an officer has behind.
I just wanted to add that we do have some data and will have in the future on things like footfall counts and things like that. So we will be able to produce some facts to back up the feelings that people have about North Walsham and other parts of the district as well.
Officer Thomas, that's very helpful. Thank you. We look forward to seeing something along those lines in the not too distant future. Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I go to page 46, the bottom, please? Relating to Capital Hydrogen and Hydrogen Valley projects. Because I understand obviously from the EDP today is an article about Norfolk District Council to research Bacton future. This isn't specifically about Bacton. It's more about the potential of hydrocarbon projects that might arise elsewhere in the district, and whether any consultancy commissioning grants could be available, or any consultants could be employed to look at any other areas should such schemes be forthcoming.
Who wants to take that?
Well,
Councillor.
I mean, certainly if there's any potential, I think that's worth exploring. I welcome that intervention. I'm not aware of other projects per se. I know obviously there's a lot of narrative around Bacton at the moment. I think as a council we've got to get ahead of this before proposals start to emerge. Of course, it will take some years, perhaps 7 to 14 years for anything to truly develop at Bacton. But I think we've got to try and get ahead of that to have an understanding of all of the challenges and opportunities, and hopefully to be able to shape any outcomes. And if there are potential other projects, I think that's certainly something we will seek to discuss with the consultant, which we will obviously procure. So I'll have another conversation about that, Nigel. I don't know if Steve has anything else to add.
So the report that went to Cabinet last Monday is for some consultancy advice to offer independent baseline report to this council so that we understand the potential of hydrogen production at the Bacton gas terminal site. The National Hydrogen Strategy at the present time is supporting two large projects, one at Redcar in Cleveland and one in Halton in the northwest, for commercial hydrogen production, large scale, particularly to decarbonize many manufacturing processes. It wasn't felt at the time that that potential existed in Bacton because we don't have a large industrial cluster in Norfolk or the east of England.
the Hydrogen Capital and Hydrogen Valley, or Capital Hydrogen and Hydrogen Valley projects do talk about a national hydrogen backbone or grid conversion of some of the national gas distribution for large-scale commercial uses in both the Greater London area and the East and West Midlands. And so both of those proposals have been announced in the last 6 months. They both identify Bacton as having significant potential. They both require significant government funding or funding, financing, investment financing, sorry, not necessarily through government. But they are very early stage proposals. And so we need to understand for North Norfolk what opportunities, potential risks and threats that they may present to our locality, the immediate communities, and the wider economic opportunities which these programs are intended to provide, and obviously the net zero carbon benefits that would be realised. So this is a large specific proposal given Bacton's historic role in terms of natural gas distribution and transition to potentially carbon capture, and also exploiting the opportunities of offshore wind off the coast. The smaller scale hydrogen production that I think you're alluding to, which could be operated at a local scale, possibly through electrolysis, possibly through gas from historic landfill sites, has been considered previously at a Norfolk level with community renewal funding, and I'm able to share that report with you. It did establish that the demand or market for hydrogen at a locality level was not well developed, and I do think some industrial processes, there might be an opportunity to revisit that with some industrial processes, particularly given the experience of the HyNet proposal in the Northwest, based on Halton, because that's going to supply large industrial users like Pilkington Glass, Kellogg's, those businesses in the Greater Manchester and Merseyside's economic region. So there is the potential for individual businesses, large users of fuel sources, to potentially consider hydrogen production. But I do think that's separate to the study that Cabinet discussed last week, which was bespoke, I suppose, to the opportunities of Bacton.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. I mean, yes, I'm not, obviously this isn't specific to Bacton, but if there were the capability within North Norfolk District Council to support in a similar way such a project, hypothetically, if one came forward, I take it that that capacity is there.
So my advice to Cabinet and the conversations I had with the leader of the council in terms of suggesting that we needed to look at the opportunities or commission a study at Bacton Energy Hub for hydrogen was to establish that baseline position. If Bacton has a serious prospect of accommodating significant hydrogen production, the pre-planning that's involved in that will probably be 7 to 10 years. And that will raise some significant issues for the authority in terms of our organisational capacity, knowledge. Do we employ a specialist dedicated policy officer in hydrogen who would engage with potential investors, look at the land use implications, look at any relationships, capacity building, information sharing with those local communities, because many communities, many members of the public do not have an understanding of what hydrogen is. They see it as a volatile substance. They think of they think of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all of the Hindenburg blimp and all of those things. And so there is a process of national education and potentially local education that needs to be taken forward around the net zero properties of hydrogen production. And if it is going to be of that scale, what we don't want to find is that we don't realise the benefits of that here in North Norfolk, in terms of
our experience of the 1970s and the natural gas, which was all piped through this district, but large numbers of our residents aren't able to avail of themselves of that cheap fuel source. And we run the risk in Norfolk and certainly in North Norfolk of history repeating itself in respect of the offshore wind energy generation, which all comes through this district, but the benefits of that aren't being realised here because it's all going to get in a super grid, down to London and the southeast. So the conversations that the leader in the council and I had was around this baseline report at Bacton to establish these opportunities which are being talked about elsewhere, but aren't being talked about directly with us, and how we position ourselves moving forward.
Fine. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me in that. There is a very significant purpose behind my question, but the answer is that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Just to follow on that, are we at the stage where it would be useful to have a briefing for all members to bring us up to speed with the kind of situation that you've just described?
I'm very happy to do that. I think a provisional date was put in the diary for the 22nd of June, where as chief executive, I could perhaps share some strategic issues, particularly offshore wind, hydrogen production, possibly issues around the government expectation around asylum seeker and migrant distribution and housing, where all local authorities are being asked to make a contribution. I think that was provisionally set for the 22nd of June, but I am conscious that your induction programme has been quite intense, and that I think it was felt we should pace ourselves a little more. I know that you've met with each of the directorate teams and had presentations, so I'm very willing to organise a session, or have organised a session to discuss those issues. I think we just need to agree a date.
Yep, that's good. I recognised obviously the intensity of induction programs, but that might be a topic that lent itself to a remote briefing session. We've had some very successful ones in past couple of years, and it's a very good way of bringing everybody, or giving everybody the opportunity anyway, to be brought up to speed with fairly exciting potential opportunities. Okay. Any other questions on this paper? Councillor Holiday, I've got, yes.
Thank you, Chair. An observation and a couple of questions, if that's okay. And the observation is that our somewhat positive statement about continued strong progress has been made is somewhat at variance with some of the data, such as housing and climate and time taken to process. I'm going to come on to that in a second. Time taken to process housing change. That was lost 3 blue flag beaches. I mean, there's quite a lot of not so positive stuff in here that is not necessarily brought up in the conclusion, which, as you know, we sometimes have comments about. Couple of specific ones. As far as the customer focus is concerned, if you look at the in-phase data, the May service level provision is 65%. That's
Which page are you on, sorry?
I'm on page 41. It's not actually in there,
Okay.
Nigel. I looked at some other data just to cross-reference it. And if you look at in-phase, the customer service level is 65.2% for May. Now that's post-elections and post-go bins and things like that. And that's 65% of the calls being answered, with an average queue time of 8.55 minutes, with 14.52 FTEs. So that's quite a good complement of staff. And I'm just saying that that's not necessarily terribly good performance, and when might we see improvement on that? And the other question was about the time taken to process housing change benefits, which is on our lovely benchmarking. And by the way, many thanks, officers, for the fantastic data you're putting together. And you know how wonderful benchmarking is, shows that we're again an outlier on the change in benefits. We had a deep dive into that before, and I wondered if it was worth having a deep dive into that now. So 2 questions. One is when is customer service going to improve? And 2, should we do a deep dive into the times taken to process housing benefit changes? Thank you.
Okay.
So first of all, on the observations, I mean, clearly we've discussed blue flags, we've discussed the benefit changes as well, in fact, as Victoria's mentioned in the previous meeting. So I didn't want to dwell on those again. Of course, the blue flags was discussed at the last meeting, I believe. And, I'm aware the water industry is still trying to wash its hands of the issue, frankly, and denying that it's got a problem, which I think is an insult to North Norfolk, to be honest with you. Given the position we're in, I'm heartened to see that, you know, we've seen 2 weekends now where those communities have been very busy. Recognise, of course, we did everything. We fulfilled our end of the bargain on the blue flags. We were let down by outside influences there, or effluences at least. So in respect of the benefit changes of circumstance, I should say, this will take a time to reflect in the data, but our current performance is around 8 days. So clearly there's still a lot of pressure there. We are seeing a lot of pressure on change of circumstances, but that's a much better improved position. I think it might be helpful for the committee to keep a closer eye on that. It's certainly something that I'm keeping a close eye on myself, with a view to you know, perhaps seeing further improvements in that performance. In respect of customer services, yes, that's an area where we certainly see a lot of pressure every time, you know, some new initiative or business rate change or something on those lines is announced. Obviously, the phone pretty much doesn't stop ringing. So we've also seen quite a lot of customers coming into the offices at the moment, as you may have observed. So very busy people. I think in the long run, we perhaps will need to think about greater resources for the customer services team to deal with both those calls and visits. And I'm certainly not afraid of having that conversation. Yes, it will mean more resources and something we have to consider quite carefully. But if you wanted to have a further discussion about that in detail at a future meeting, I would certainly welcome that. Obviously, the portfolio holder is not here, couldn't make it here today due to you know, personal issues, etc. So she wanted to be here, so she probably would have answered your question. But it's certainly something that we need to look at on an ongoing basis. I don't know if any of the officers have anything to add on any of those points. I can see Tina Stankley has indicated. Thank you.
Yes, just coming back to the indicator on the change in circumstances on housing benefit claims. The team prioritise new claims over changing circumstances because they're conscious of the fact that it's more important to get payments out to people in the first instance rather than look at the change in circumstances. And I hope members will agree with that sentiment in terms of paying people straight away as soon as possible when they put in a new claim. And then secondary is the change in circumstances, but they are pushing hard on tackling that and reducing that waiting time for change of circumstances too.
Was that? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Can I have a proposer then and a seconder for this report? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Boyle. Show of hands then to agree with that. Thank you. Okay. Right, I'm conscious we've been going for over the 2 hours, and we would normally take a break at the 2-hour point if we haven't finished the meeting. So I know we've got one other substantive piece of business to complete. Would we like to just take a 5-minute break, just to a comfort break? I would like to. Okay, if we can just take a 5-minute break, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. Can we reconvene, please, for the last substantive item on the agenda anyway, which is the, just find the right page, contextual performance report. That's page 83 to 94. Who wants to lead on this
I
one?
believe Officer Lucy Wilshaw is going to introduce this one.
Great.
That's you, Officer
Yes,
Wilshaw.
Thank you.
Then the floor is yours.
Thank you. So out of all of the 15 contextual measures in the current corporate plan, only 4 have been updated since the last review that we did. None of those are scoring red in our benchmark comparison to the SIPA nearest neighbours, our similar local authorities. 2 of those are scoring in the amber category, but I'm not concerned about those because they're either improving or the numbers have stayed the same. Out of all the 15 contextual measures, 2 I've flagged up that may be of concern to the committee. The first is the index of multiple deprivation score, which is in the category red, but the figure is improving since the last time. But this isn't a timely data set. It was last updated in 2019, and I spoke recently with the Office for National Statistics, and they can't confirm when the next release of that data set will be. There are some big reforms at the ONS at the moment, so it could be that the IMD is reviewed as part of that process. The IMD is also much more valuable when we look at local areas rather than North Norfolk as a whole, just because of the nature of the data set. But having a look into it further as well, we're scoring poorly with the barriers to housing and services domain and the living environment domain. And the data sets that underlie this are things like housing affordability, fuel poverty, and distance to services in our rural communities. So I don't think any of these things will be of a surprise to the committee. The other one that I flagged up is the 3-year business survival rate. This is in the amber category, but the figure has decreased since the previous period. Again, due to the nature of this data set, it's not a timely data set, and this has a 5-year time lag on it. Also, in my professional opinion, as regards to business data set, this is not the strongest business data set. I can recommend others. And also there are many business data sets, when we look at them as a whole, they do portray a much better profile of what's going on with our businesses in North Norfolk. So the committee may decide just to continue monitoring these measures that I flagged up and the other measures in the report as part of these meetings, or they may decide that they want to warrant further investigation or recommend actions to Cabinet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Holiday.
I was wondering if we could consider a deep dive into 2 of these, and one of them would be the index of multiple deprivation, which I know it's very broad and I know it's out of date and I know it's not specific, but there are some areas, as you were mentioning, which we do have a control over, which is housing. And we have the ability to help with fuel poverty, and we have the ability to encourage better transport. And there are areas there that we could be working on. And I think that's be an area that I'd like to look into further. And the other is the contextual 13, which is what I was referring to in the Police and Crime Commissioner's questions when he was agreeing. Well, the question was, is the increased amount of money we're spending on preventing domestic violence effective? And he said no. And this actually correlates it in the rate of incidents and antisocial behaviour and violence, including sexual violence, up in our area. And I think that's really important. We should be looking into it because this has always been considered a very low crime area. And if it isn't anymore, and it's correlating with what the Police and Crime Commissioner is saying, I think we should look into that in more detail. Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
Yes, I would agree with that. Apologies, I wasn't here for the meeting recommencing. I first of all just wanted to thank Lucy for all the work in producing this report. I know she's been putting in a lot of hours to support the work of the authority, and it's very much appreciated. But certainly agree with what Victoria was saying there. It's concerning to see some of those changes in the crime data. Unfortunately, we didn't get the opportunity to have much of a conversation about this at the last Ovian Scrutiny Committee meeting. I think a future conversation would be very useful. We're certainly seeing trends, I suppose you could say, in terms of antisocial behaviour. Of course, you know about the issues we've been experiencing with vandalism, which has been affecting council assets. But certainly I'm seeing an increase in reports of such issues. And as a member of the Police and Crime Panel, it's something we're deeply concerned about is the low conviction rates for sexual crimes, violent crimes, etc. So it's something that is routinely questioned at that setting, and I think having an understanding of it here would be useful. Yes, sort of share the concern really that was raised with Lucy. Some of the data on businesses, is obviously there's quite a lag there in terms of how old that is. So that's a frustration, but I think if we can find any better way of understanding that in future, but certainly happy to recommend this report, and thank you again for the work in producing it.
Okay. Any other comments? No? Okay, are we all done then? Can I have a proposer and a seconder to accept this report? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Paul. It's a second. Show of hands, please. That looks like unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. Right, that concludes item 15.
Right. Nigel, sorry, are we going to take up Victoria's suggestions of bringing those back?
Yes, I'm assuming that this is going to come back on a
Yeah, I just liaise with Lucy. We are looking to bring this back in line with the performance report. Do you think there's any further kind of data available that could be drilled down to on those measures that Councillor Holiday referred to, or is that something that might be beyond our reach?
I think Mr. Blatch wants to respond on. Go ahead.
So these are contextual measures, as Lucy has stated. There is a significant time lag in the release of some of these. We are being advised by Lucy and Helen in the development of the new corporate plan, which data sets are most robust and enduring for the life of that new corporate plan. And so I think we need to, the corporate plan in its highest level is to be presented to Cabinet at the end of this month, and your July meeting, hopefully for adoption on the 21st of July, and thereafter it's proposed in September a series of officer and member workshops to support development of actions in the form of a delivery or action plan moving forward. But Lucy and Helen are advising Cabinet and CLT on the best measures for ongoing contextual analysis and benchmarking moving forward as part of the new corporate plan development.
And I think it's probably worth stating that we currently have 3 performance reports running in one form or another. And we've seen 2 of them today. And the third one which is the benchmarking, that's the word I was looking for, the benchmarking report, which has been running for a while and developing in its form. My understanding is that we'll see that in July. And I guess that's I think that fits in with some phasing of information flow. Is that right?
Review the data sets because that was developed purely by this committee, so we can review those data sets as much as you like. So I think we're scheduled to do that every 6 months. We review to see what data sets you want to keep analysing and what you want to include, so we can put anything the committee wants in those reports. Yeah, so that's next month's committee meeting.
And it ensures that you see the most up-to-date information. If we time when that report comes to you, you can see the most up-to-date benchmarking information.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You'd be a bit out of date at the moment.
So we look forward to seeing that in July. But for the performance buffs amongst us, we've only seen 2/3 of the reports today, and we can look forward for the third one next month. So that'll give us a more complete picture of what's going on, Mr. Branch.
Is it just worth highlighting what the difference of the 3 reports is?
By all means.
Okay, so in the current format that's presented today, the previous report that you talked, that was presented to you in terms of the performance report was performance against the council's corporate plan, and that now we move into a new 4-year period. We're going to develop a new corporate plan. So the committee over the last 4 years, there was some concern that was marking our own homework, and was it particularly transparent? So it was some reports against things that the council said it would do, but didn't allow comparative analysis with other local authorities. So it was things that we'd said was important, and we said we'll plant 110,000 trees, for example, as one project, and then over the 4-year period we said we planted 15,000 in year 1, 30,000 in year 2, 50,000 in year 3, etc. So there wasn't any meaningful. It was useful to report, but it wasn't necessarily set against a target, or that we would, an even profile of 27,500 trees in each of the 4 years, for example. Is that correct about that? Don't do the maths, just take the example if you don't mind. There was then a request for how were we performing as North Norfolk District Council against other Norfolk authorities or authorities within our family group. Because whilst it's useful to benchmark our position against other Norfolk authorities, we are highly rural, we're coastal. Norwich, Great Yarmouth and Kings Lynn have significant urban deprivation. We don't have those issues. So there is issues of understanding of place that allow those comparisons. And so the report that you'll receive at the next meeting is a benchmarking report against other family group authorities, so largely in Devon and the southwest, parts of Cumbria, where we are most similar, and the nature of our communities reflects. So there's challenges of refuse collection in rural areas relative to an urban area with urban concentration, etc. So that's more useful in allowing us to judge customer response times, which obviously Dr. Holliday raised in the previous item, and allows us to see how we're doing against those authorities, both regionally, in Norfolk and in a family group. And then there's this data, which is subject of this report, which is contextual, and that provides the context against national data sets and whether our position improves or worsens over time. And that isn't subjective around our interpretation, because it is using national data sets provided by health, police and crime commissioners, government returns, which we have to make in terms of council tax collection, planning determinations and those sort of things. So these are benchmarking things in terms of context, so we can see whether our economy is stronger, whether the health of our communities are stronger. And that's the difference in the 3 separate reports. And I thought that was just useful to provide that context so you can understand the journey and what we do measure, and you can have influence over what you ask us to present in terms of the relative priority, and that might change over time on the basis of the deep dive which Councillor Holliday referred to previously. I hope that's helpful.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. That certainly gives a good description of the 3 reports that we now see. So thank you. Right, and then turning to the next item on the business is item 16, which is the Cabinet Work Programme.
Yeah, so just to note really that next month we're expecting a number of financial reports, so the outturn report, treasury management, debt management report, and then also the draft corporate plan, as Chief Executive just mentioned, will be coming to Cabinet first and then scrutiny on the 12th. Beyond that, I think we are waiting really to see what comes out of the corporate plan for kind of further significant reports. I've got the Democratic Services Manager over there. Just want to mention something.
I just wanted to update members on a couple of changes since this was published on your agenda. So it's likely that the debt management annual report won't come through till September now. I received an email from Sean Knight last night regarding that. And also we have a couple of additional items that aren't listed. So One is relating to a loan for Homes for Wales, which I understand the Chairman of Scrutiny has been notified about. That will be coming through as an urgent item, as it's not on the forward plan. And the other one is a transition accelerator programme. So that's coming forward too. So those are not on your published work programme. Thank you.
Thanks. I think, yeah, as we mentioned earlier during the discussion of the overview and scrutiny work programme, I think it probably would be helpful for members to see that coastal transition programme update. That's everything for the cabinet work programme. If you're happy for me to move on to the overview and scrutiny, just kind of a update. So obviously we have discussed the work programme today. I was just going to refer back to those two deep dive possibilities that Victoria raised. Firstly, on the PCC questions, I think perhaps that's something we need to speak to the PCC directly about. Obviously, it was unfortunate that he couldn't attend the last meeting when he was invited to, and certainly we need to consider whether we move that forward, get him back to a future meeting and raise those points on domestic violence increasing and other violent crimes, antisocial behaviour. So definitely don't want to lose sight of that one. Secondly, on that, the points of multiple deprivation, I'm just trying to get an answer really, Lucy, is there more data available on that, or are we really at the limit of what is around? In which case a deep dive might not be very fruitful.
Yeah, I was want to look at all the underlying data sets for the IMD, because although the IMD might be ending, the data sets underlying it are not. So I can go straight to source. And Karen Hill's team are quite interested in looking into deprivation with their portfolio holder as well. So it could be that I could work with Karen perhaps on that.
So there is perhaps potential to raise that as a future work programme item, I would say. Beyond that, I think it was already described, and it was a very useful explanation from the Chief Executive, just to say that we did used to receive all of our performance reports together at the same meeting. I think on occasion that got very confusing, referring to different reports. So we have tried to break those up a bit, bringing the benchmarking report to the next meeting, so that we can kind of separate those a bit and avoid future confusion. That's everything I think I had to add, unless there's any questions.
Any questions on the two work programmes? No? You happy to note those then? Can I have a just show of hands to do that, please? Yes, that looks unanimous. Thank you. Is there anything you want to add with regard to the action plan at the end? Sorry, the actions report.
Just to note that we have got things listed such as ambulance response time monitoring for September. So I need to look at that and see how it corresponds with the work programme. I don't think there's any particular actions. Obviously, reference was made again to those responses or questions from the PCC. I'll share those with the new committee, so they can kind of get some context on what was discussed or not discussed, what was asked there, and the responses received, and then we can look to get the PCC back as soon as possible.
Yeah, okay, that would be very helpful, because I think it will connect with our previous meeting that was March, which it seems a while ago now. Right, okay, I think that completes the business on our agenda. We've got no reasons to exclude the press or the public, so I formally close the meeting. Thank you everybody for your attendance and contribution today, and to the new members, I hope that